Welcome to For the Love of Money Talk Show. I'm your host Emilio Calmera, and we're here at 98.1 Pearl FM Radio. We're actually virtual nowadays, so I'm actually doing this video from Skype actually. So I'm not really live in the studio. I'm live on Skype, so to speak, and we're streaming directly to Facebook as well as the YouTube. So we're definitely taking advantage of the technology realm. I think we might have to go more and more towards that realm because the COVID situation is not really improving in the way that we would like. And in particular, in my case, traveling is my medication, but I'm not able to travel. So I'm getting a lot of headaches these days because it's good to get off the island from time to time. A lot of stuff is happening in the political realm. There was some talk about the response from some of our advisors and so forth when it comes to the particular institution that was supposed to be set up by Holland, and there was advice given about that. Not advice, but the basically an overview of the if it's legal or not and so forth. And apparently, that didn't get out to Parliament. So the PFP group did send out I said that a media I said a response to it, and so it looks like there needs to be some explanation on what's going on and so forth. A lot of things happening out there, not only in St. Martin, also in America. There was talk about if the stimulus money that the Americans was receiving, if it has to be paid back. And so if it has to be paid back, that might be a bit of a challenge for most Americans. As we know, most Americans have very little savings, and that is cause to be concerned. Also, the rent deferrals and not forgiveness. So eventually, they would have to catch back up with paying the rent and so forth. So that's going to be some troubling times ahead. In our case, the Dutch is adamant that salaries has to be cut. They're not accepting a lot of the cuts that was proposed. So they adamantly is kind of saying you have to get into the salaries itself. So there will probably be a repercussion for this, and salaries will have to be cut. And the question is, how do you go about doing such? Because you will hear maybe the Dutch or whoever say, the persons with the biggest salary should cut more, of course, than the person with the lower salary. That, of course, that is considering that everyone is equal, which is not really the case, because a higher salary does not necessarily mean that your disposable income is more, because you have to look at maybe student debts the person still has incurred for the higher education that the person engaged in. The person probably have a higher mortgage payment due to the, of course, the higher salary, but then cost of living in terms of mortgages and so forth. Our homes are very expensive, so the person is probably paying a high mortgage loan. So there's a number of things that are not equal. So you cannot say, well, because that person is making a higher salary, they can cut more without looking at the underlying conditions. So that's not going to be an easy 1, 2, 3 step, but nonetheless, it has to be done. How to go about it is going to be the talk of the town, I think. So very interesting times ahead. And the question is too, if everyone was to cut across the board without considering each person's situation or the majority of person's situation, can everyone afford to take a hit? And that is the question. Can everyone afford to take a hit? When I say everyone, I mean everyone. So that's including banks, landlords, and so forth, because you cannot expect salaries to take a hit and then everything else remain equal. That's just won't work. So if persons have to take a hit, then of course everyone has to take a hit in order for it to work. It won't work if some people take a hit and some people don't take a hit. But the question there would be who own the assets and who own the liabilities. because of course if you have a private investor from the United States, Canada, or wherever they are from, they might not necessarily want to take a hit in terms of, let's say they have real estate that is owned in their company or whatever, and they are, you know, not really vested in St. Martin in the extent that they are permanent resident, or they're living here permanently and so forth. They might not necessarily want to take a hit. So you have to look at who own your assets and liabilities, and if the majority of it is owned locally, then of course it's not easy, but it's a bit more um, easier to accomplish in that sense. Like Japan, for example, if you look at the Japan's debt, I would say almost 95% of that debt is local, and only about 5-10% of Japan's debt is owned by foreigners. So Japan is a whole different ball game. So they can settle their debts or arrange things differently internally. But when you have a situation where most of your assets and stuff like that are owned outside, then it becomes problematic. For example, if you look at the banks here, how many of the banks are local? So would they want to take a hit? That's a discussion point. That is remaining to be seen if that would be the case. So it's very interesting times ahead. Very interesting times ahead, and it's going to be challenging. There seems to be talk about there's another bubble with the stock market. Stock market is totally like is disconnected from Main Street, and so you're seeing record highs. But usually, if you look at the historical trend, crashes usually occur just before record highs. So if you look at the trend, it looks like we're heading towards that trend as well. So it's good to be prepared for the inevitable if you look at historical precedents. So one of the videos today will be discussing the possible bubble and the bubble busting, and what can you do to weather that type of storm. So not only do we have hurricanes out there coming, we also have the financial hurricane that is going to be upon us probably before the end of this year. I want to touch a little bit on, to get into the swing of things with the bubble bursting, I want to touch a bit on this document I read. Didn't read the whole document, but it was a 2010 document, and it was very interesting to see some of the things that was said. And I had one particular thing that was said that they predicted that may not come true, but actually did come true. You can see how things can change within a span of almost 10 years, of course. So I'll try to share the screen so you can see it. And the document is called, okay, let me make sure that this goes good, because the last time it did not go well. So let me just make sure that it goes well this time. And so the document is called Debt and Deleveraging, the Global Credit Bubble and Its Economic Consequences. So this was a document that was actually written in January of 2010. So that's some time ago. And it was written by the McKinsey Global Institute. And let me just look at the preface. No, not the preface, rather. Let's go to the executive summary. It talks about the recent busting of the great global credit bubble not only led to the first worldwide recession since the 1930s, but also left an enormous burden of debt that now weighs on the prospects for recovery. Today, government and business leaders are facing the twin questions of how to prevent similar crises in the future and how to guide the economy through the looming and lengthy process of debt reduction or deleveraging. Remember, this is 2010 document, and you can see we write in the same malaise, I would say, the same sort of crisis again, kind of sped up via COVID, but nonetheless it was in that direction. Even without COVID just sped it up. This says to help address these questions, the McKinsey Global Institute launched a research effort to understand the growth of debt and leverage before the crisis in different countries. the economic consequences of deleveraging, and the practical implications for policymakers, financial regulators, and business executives. In the course of the research, we created an extensive fact base on debt and leverage in each sector of 10 mature economies and 4 emerging economies. In addition, we analyzed 45 historic episodes of deleveraging in which an economy significantly reduced its total debt to GDP ratio that have occurred since 1930. This analysis adds new details to the picture of how leverage grew around the world before the crisis and how the process of reducing it could unfold. We find that 1. Leverage levels are still very high in some sectors of several countries, and this is a global problem, not just a US one. To assess the sustainability of leverage, one must take a granular view using multiple sector-specific metrics. Our analysis has identified 10 sectors within 5 economies that have a high likelihood of deleveraging. Empirically, a long period of deleveraging nearly always follows a major financial crisis. Historic deleveraging episodes have been painful, on average lasting 6 to 7 years and reducing the ratio of debt to GDP by 25%. GDP typically contracts during the first several years and then recovers. So folks, you're hearing these numbers here, 7 years. Sounds like the year of completion when it comes to biblical proportions. 7 is the number of completion. If history is a guide, we would expect many years of debt reduction in specific sectors of some of the world's largest economies, and this process will exert a significant drag on GDP growth. So that was the executive summary. It goes on to say a few more things, but I'm not going to get into that. It's a very interesting article. You should check it out. It's called the Debt and Deleveraging, the Global Credit Bubble and its Economic Consequences by McKinsey Global Institute, written January 2010. So what I'm going to do now quickly, I'm going to get into a quick presentation before we get into the video today. So let me stop sharing and then start to share again and then see what happens here. So let's go on to this presentation. The future is at the next exit, and everyone exit I'm assuming is different and will be different, and someone exit should not be the same as yours necessarily, because everyone have a different path, a different situation, and so forth. So you should not try to ask someone what you're doing or whatever. You can ask to get an idea, but everyone's situation is different. So you should make certain decisions based off of your particular situation and not someone else's situation. Now it says here in Proverbs 22 verse 16 that it says, "He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty." So he who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. So this seems to be a fundamental principle. Okay, it looks like the presentation is not actually moving forward. I'm not too sure why it's doing that. It happened last week as well. So let's try this again. There's some technical glitches here. Okay. So here we go again. Okay, so then it goes on to say also that money will decide the fate of mankind. This is from Jack Ruff. And D.L. Hewley, also a comedian, says the love of money is the root of all evil, but the lack of money is the root of all crime. and we are seeing a spike in. I don't know why they love these high-end dyes so much, but we've seen a spike in the stealing of the high-end dye vehicles. And 1 second there, of the high-end dye vehicles and stripping and so forth, and it's becoming a sort of an epidemic. But at the end of the day, D.L. Hewley was kind of right when he said, the lack of money is the root of all crime. So I'm assuming we probably will be seeing a lot of crime and crime spiking going forward. So that's something to also prepare for, not only hurricanes, but you also have to prepare for the inevitable when it comes to the lack of money, of course. Then it says, leaving your comfort zone is hard. Staying broke is hard. You need to pick your heart. Everything has pros and cons. Everything is not easy and so forth. So um, leaving your comfort zone is can be hard as well. But if you want to stay broke and so forth, don't do what you have to do. That's basically what this is saying in a nutshell. Back to my life balance diagram. What you're seeing here, of course, is that everyone has to deal with time and how you allocate time to the different components. You have health, and under health you can have a bunch of different things. So you can have sleeping on time, eating properly, and so forth. You can have a whole module on health by itself. Family as well, family planning, different things with the family, vacationing and so forth, spirituality, financial planning and development and so forth. But however, money and time seems to be in our framework. The more money you have, the more you can free up your time. But what I'm seeing though is that because of the focus sometimes to be too much on financial planning and development, it's causing a number of problems. And if you look out throughout the world, eventually this going to be the focus. I think this is going to be more focused than financial planning and so forth, because the world has kind of distracted from resource management as opposed to money. Money is getting in the way of technology and so forth, and the link now is a problem because we can actually create an abundance without human labor, and that causes a problem because human labor is what is needed to be sold to get money to survive. But if human labor can be practically outsourced for 90%, then the whole framework falls apart. So then I'm assuming that this one going to gradually should replace this one, which is resource management and relevant learning. But that's a whole different topic by itself. Now, the uncreative mind can spot the wrong answers, but it takes a very creative mind to spot the wrong questions. The question has never been, do we have the money? The question has always been, do we have the resources? And this was said by Jack Fresco, and we do have the resources today to accomplish a lot of things, but of course money is the stumbling block. Money is what's getting in the way. Total American debt, this chart shows total American debt. It's a little recap where we've seen that American debt as per 2016 was clocking over 70 trillion, and the national incomes, the blue line, is steadily going up, but not at the same growth rate as debt. And of course that's gonna be problematic because eventually when you deleverage, remember at the end of the day, wealth is never destroyed, it's merely transferred. And all this debt has to do with mainly real estate or whatever. And when that bubble busts, a lot of wealth gets transferred to somebody else. Okay, and the rest get wiped out basically. And so that's a big problem. We also saw that productivity back in the days before 1971, 1973, so that it was going up together, both productivity and hourly compensation. Now you're seeing productivity has continued the trend while hourly compensation has flattened out. So the incomes are not there to sustain this type of debt levels. I also touch on this credit issue where more credit comes about than there are goods and services. It eventually causes the prices of goods and services to seem more expensive, but it's actually the value of currency diminishing. So in this particular picture, you're seeing that in 1998 you can buy with $20 almost a full cart, shopping cart of food. In 2005 less, and 2013 far less, and that seems to be the trend going forward. We also see another overview here that's showing you changing consumption costs. It shows, for example, that all the different inflation categories, like in this case, you're seeing that education inflation is about 39, so that's pretty high. Housing is 26, healthcare is 9, transport is 6, and then the others you're seeing what really went down. So you're seeing like a reduction in costs, which is for like stuff like consumption, like furnishings and equipment, reduced by 22% in terms of costs, cheaper to buy, in other words. Recreation, negative 26, clothing, negative 37, and communication costs, negative 45. And that's like Facebook, we use WhatsApp. So those costs are definitely reducing. But the main costs that we need to survive or are very important to us, or what we spend most of our money on, those costs are going to the roof. And you can see that here in this overview that says share of spending. So for education is in this particular overview showing that it really going up 39% in costs, and we usually spend 2% of the whole budget or GDP or so forth on education. Housing is the biggest, which is 23%. So housing costs take up most of our spending, and in this case, it's showing you 23%. Healthcare is 5%. Transport is 13%, and food is 12% of our spending goes to food. And so you can see that our basics in terms of housing, education, and so forth are through the roof, and that's where we spend most of our money. So that's how we get in poverty. As for stuff that really cannot benefit us that much, those costs are those inflation or those costs are actually getting lower and lower, which is furnishing and equipment, clothing, and so forth. So you can see with wages stagnating, the higher costs for basics have eaten into disposable incomes in many mature economies. So this is a problem globally as well. Let me just skip this. So this was a particular chart from January 15, 2019, which showed that global debt of 244 trillion nears record highs. And so this is going to be a big problem. And what happens with debt? What does growing debt mean for you? It says that taxes will have to rise on our kids and grandkids because they will have to pay for the mess. Unemployment will rise because every business in the world, big or small, is trying to reduce overhead. One of the quickest ways to do this is to reduce payroll liability by laying off employees. Then it says that taxes will rise and our kids and grandkids will pay for the mess. Okay, that's a double. Technology is invisible and relatively inexpensive, so today businesses can do more business with fewer employees and thus become more profitable. This will lead to more unemployment. And then our school system have not prepared students for the information age. We've seen a lot of teachers and so forth are struggling with this new framework, and so it's something that they have to actually learn. It's not something that they can just know on their own. It's something that they have to go through a training for, because this is a new dynamics, a new way of teaching and so forth, Zoom and all these platforms. So technology and its applications are changing so fast that college graduates are not equipped to succeed in the marketplace. Today, most college graduates are obsolete the minute they receive their diploma. And frugality is now cool. For years, people went into debt in order to look rich. It was hip to sport the latest designer handbag or drive an expensive car. Today, the opposite is true. People are proud to be frugal and are spending money more wisely. This will only add fuel to the economic crisis. And it also says that the only way the economy can expand is by us getting into debt. Being frugal may be cool, but it will not help the economy. When we as a country stop spending, unemployment rises and small businesses fail. Also, we saw that the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Finance of Terrorism Act 2009 and also Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, Common Reporting Standards as well, etc., has stepped up their game at a time when income and wealth inequality is peaking. And there's sufficient evidence to suggest that these regulations will affect the poor and middle class more than the wealthy, which in turn further compounds the wealth and income inequality gap. And an old joke, I said this already, two friends were walking in the woods when a bear suddenly jumped out and came at them. And one of them said, "Do you think we can outrun the bear?" And one friend asked, and the other friend said, "I don't have to outrun the bear, I only need to outrun you." And that's pretty much a joke. And so what we have to do, it says that champions do not become champions when they win the event, but in the hours, weeks, months, and years they spend preparing for it. The victorious performance itself was merely the demonstration of their championship character. This was said by T. Allen Armstrong. So for us to be champions and to come out champions out of this environment, we have to prepare, folks. We have to prepare, put plans in place, put visions in place, execute, stick to the plan, stick to our goals and whatever. And this is something that has to be done like a lifestyle. It's not going to happen by the way we was doing things from the past. So I'm now going to play the video that talks about this bubble busting and what are some of the things you can do. And so I hope you all queued up to play that video. So let me unshare my screen. And so this video is entitled The Bubble Bursting.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And I tell you what, we have some great programs coming up, and this is one of them. Because the markets are in turmoil, everything is shifting, and if you're not paying attention, you're going to get wiped out. So this is another very important program, fantastic program. So our guest today, Kim would have been here, but she's doing her favorite thing. She's moving money around right now. So she likes doing that. But anyway, our guest today, this is about the greatest bubble, and for those of you with a 401k, or hoping for retirement, or planning on playing golf for the rest of your life, you better pay attention. Because I think, and a lot of other people think, and our guests think, the biggest stock market crash is on us now. And I'm going to remind you of one thing. At Rich Dad don't sell stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or ETF. We don't make recommendations. We're just purely educational. So all views mentioned on this program are for you to digest on your own, because we don't make recommendations. So our guest today is an old friend, Harry. He's not old, but been a long-time friend. I followed him for years. He is one of the greatest forecasters I've ever met, and I remember he was the first guy to introduce me when I was studying coming up to demography, and he called it "Demography is Destiny." When you look at demographics, you can see the future. So right now, when you look at the future, the baby boomers are old guys. You know, they've had they're the first generation, I think, to have a 401k, because we came off what's called defined benefit pension plan and went to a defined contribution, which is the 401k or IRA or SEPs. So the baby boomers, for the first generation, to be hanging with their butt out in the air right now. And if the market crashes, they're gone. Whereas my parents' generation, the World War II generation, they had a defined benefit pension plan. That's like what Ford still gives out, I think. So if the market crashed, Ford still made sure you got a paycheck for life. So the baby boomers, you're screwed. Listen to this program now. And if you're the kid or child or grandkid of a baby boomer, you better listen up too, because you don't want grandpa and grandma moving in with you when they get wiped out in this next crash. So that's Harry Dent, and our other guest here is a man I just met. He's a Navy pilot, incredible pilot, Stan Harley. He publishes the Harley Market Letter, and the reason I'm gushing about Stan is because he flew for Top Gun and all that. He knows Tom Cruise. No, he doesn't. And he's a Navy pilot, and I flew for the Marine Corps. So there was this, and he flew out of Miramar, outside of San Diego, and we used to go to the same bar and fight each other. But anyway, so it's really band of brothers right now. So welcome to the program. So I'll let Harry, Harry and I just came back from a fantastic tour all the way through Australia. That was fantastic. I love the Aussies. So Harry, welcome to the program. And what do you want to say about this bubble coming up?
Well, Robert, I love Australia too. They're the best audience in the world. They're the most hungry for new information I've found in the world. And they have fewer experts like you and I to listen to there.
Thank God.
They're in the middle of nowhere. I hate to say it. So I love the Australians. My problem, Robert, with Australians is they have the biggest real estate bubble in the world except for China. And they don't get it. They think, our real estate's gone up forever and we're good people and we deserve this bubble. And so I always have to wake them up and say, hey, greater the bubble, greater the burst. That's my number one statement from everything I've studied in demographics and cycles. The greater the bubble, the greater the burst.
Well, the problem is, Harry, what they're proud of is they had a recession in 35 years. So after you left, my friends had to go on suicide watch. There was
it's just natural, Robert, that when things go good, people just think, it's okay. It's not okay for you to be sitting in your house going up 25% a year and the stock market going up 30% a year while you do nothing. That is something for nothing. That's what's called a bubble. So we're in this bubble, and the key thing, I have been looking now for 2 years for the NASDAQ, the leading stock bubble, to get up above 11,000. That's what that was my target for the bubble to peak. And it has done that. It has done that more than that. And it's been hitting that in recent weeks. And of course, at the same time, I'm looking for this, Stan Harley, who is the best short-term forecaster in markets, says the same thing, like mid-August is looking like a peak. So I think people really need to wake up here. I know it's hard because the bubble keeps going up and it seems like it can do no wrong. No, this bubble is peaking here. This is the best I've seen. I've also been looking for the NASDAQ to make new highs and the S&P 500 and broader markets to only retest their highs in this really stupid bubble. I mean, for the stocks to be going to new highs in the greatest depression, downturn with the COVID-19 in history, okay, wake up.
Good.
This is an alarm. Get the hell out of the stock market.
Right. So I've had the pleasure of, I'm glad you invited Stan because he's you have a tremendous respect for other pilots, and he flew the F-4, F-14, and F-18. And I was a helicopter pilot, so we're kind of different breed of cat. But anyway, we kind of see the world from the same point of view. And I don't know if Stan's ever crashed, but I've crashed 3 times. And so for those of you 401k, it doesn't feel good. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The rush going down, I mean, you go down a lot faster than it comes up. So Stan, as a fellow pilot, welcome to the program, and give us a little background about your flying background. Everybody knows about Harry and his forecasting, but I was respect other pilots.
Glad to be here. Thank you for your service to our country. Fortunately, all of my landings equal my takeoffs. Never need to pull that ejection handle. Had a few close calls.
They're still charging me for the 3 aircraft I lost.
I think Harry makes some good points about the market. I'm a market technician. I look at a variety of fundamental, quantitative, and technical factors. Primary technical analysis with an emphasis on market cycles. But I've looked at several things, and I'll highlight a few of them here. First of all, unemployment. That's some data that all of us can download from the FRED website. I've looked at that data all the way back to the mid-1940s since its origination. And
would you explain what the FRED website is, please?
That's a website that is maintained by the U.S. government, BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And anyone can go on, just type in Google, it pops right up. And there is just a plethora of data there that has to do with equity prices, home prices, interest rates. That's maintained by the U.S. government. It's totally free. Anyone
I always
can
thought I thought Fred was connected to the Fed. It's not.
It is. It is, but they maintain they maintain the website for home prices, equity prices, bond prices, and the BLS supplies the data for unemployment.
So that's kind of your crystal. That's kind of your crystal ball, is what you're saying, isn't it?
It is, and one can download it, dump it into a spreadsheet, and analyze it. And I find that unemployment goes up and down on a cyclical basis. And what I have found is that, as a general rule, the best levels in unemployment for the then current economic cycle tend to precede stock market tops by 5 to 7 months on average. So that is to say, when unemployment gets to its lowest level, then you punch the stop clock, and approximately 5 to 7 months later, the stock market reaches its high for the then current cycle, and that works very, very well.
So that kind of fits your way of looking at things, Harry, because you look at the trends. But so what you're saying, when Trump was saying unemployment is an all-time low, in your mind, you're saying it's going to bust.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, as the stock market hits a peak, unemployment reached about 3.4%. Going from memory here, but I believe it hit a level of 3.4, which is very low historically in the post-World War II era. That occurred in February of this year. So historically, if we had 5 to 7 months to that February level, that would suggest about now for a stock market peak, plus or minus.
And now is August 2020, just so people.
August 2020. Then I look at other things. I look at market cycles. I look at divergences among the various indices. We have a cycle that averages just under 7 years, and I know Harry's familiar with this as well. I've heard him talk about it. It's 82 months, 82.2 from a regression analysis. You call it 7 years. The market has a propensity to make significant troughs about every 7 years, Robert. The last one occurred in February of 2016. 7 years prior to that, March of 2009, 7 years prior to that, October of 2002, and so on. Going forward in time, the analysis points to December 2022 for the next low in that cycle. And the standard deviation on that's about 4 months. So we should be looking to the latter part of December 2022, early part of 2023 for the next trough in that 7-year cycle. Of course, before you make a low, you have to make a high. And the highs in that cycle tend to occur between 2 and 3 years prior to the low. So back of the envelope math, if we're going to make a low in December 2022, back it up 2 to 3 years, let's use 2.5 as an easy average. That points to right now, summer of 2020 for a high. So we are essentially there, just from back of the envelope math.
And Harry, how does it fit with your demographic or your way of forecasting?
Okay, Robert. Number one, my demographic cycles peaked in late 2007 for the baby boom spending cycle, which I said back in the mid 1980s. Now, but there's a bigger cycle, which Stan and I both agree on. This is rare for a short-term guy like Stan and me to be looking at a 90-year cycle. If you look at the stock market, since the stock exchanges were established in the late 1700s, back 250 years, okay? The greatest cycle evident in the stock market is every 90 years you get a super bubble peak, like 1837, then the crash into 1842, and then 1929 to 32. And now I was calling for late 2019 to late 2022, exactly what Stan's saying for the bottom. This is the biggest thing that happens, and it's because of technology cycles that come together every 45 years and then more so every 90 years. This is
Harry, mess up you real quickly. So 90 years from 2020 is 1930?
90-year cycle that peaked in late 29, bottomed in late 32, 90 years later, late 2019, just give it a few months, early 2020, February. This is the biggest cycle we will see in our lifetimes. I've been saying this for decades.
You have been. You have been. You've been having warning. You've warned a lot of people about the 90-year cycle. So that's today, from the Great Depression. So let me ask Stan. What do you say about that, Stan?
I agree with Harry on that one. I've got data going back to the 1600s, and I don't want to get too technical with numerology, but there are a number of Fibonacci relationships. I'll leave it with that all cluster in the present time frame, going all the way back to the 1600s, including the peaks in 1835, 1929, 1720, which preceded that, and even the tulip mania of 1637 in the Netherlands. Projecting forward, putting them into a regression modeling, which I've done, all coincides with the 2020 time period for a major peak, and we're essentially there. So now that's the macro, that's the big picture, and then trying to narrow this down a little bit more, I look at the 7-year cycle. We have some divergences right now in the advanced decline data, which is something that I track very closely. Yeah. We have the advanced decline line, which is a summation of each day's net difference between advancing issues and declining issues. Market technicians keep track of this.
You lost me at hello.
Well, the advanced decline line is making a new high, and a lot of technicians will point that out, and they draw the conclusion that, well, with the AD line making a new high, therefore the Dow, the S&P, and everything should follow.
Okay. We have to go to a break. So here we are.
Okay. All right.
You guys are watching these waves or cycles, and Harry's been warning about this one for a long time, the 90-year cycle. So if it was 1929, let's call it 1930. 90 years is 2020. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the question is how big? And what should we do? So when we come back, we'll be talking to these gentlemen, especially for those of you with a 401k or have a pension you're counting on. This may be the most important two men you can listen to in the history of your life. We'll be right back. Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anywhere on iTunes, Android, or YouTube. And please leave us a comment, what you think of the program. When you listen, all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them for one reason. It's because we're only educational and informational. We make no recommendations, although some of our guests may make recommendations. But it's up to you to make up your own mind. But most importantly, if you listen to this program again, repetition, you'll learn twice as much from these great teachers today. But also include your friends, family, and business partners, and then discuss it, and you'll learn so much more than you did if you read a book. So our guest today is a great friend, a person I look up to for years, is Harry Dent. I've been following his message. He's very accurate in his forecast. Very accurate. He called the great boom ahead, and now he's calling the great crash ahead. And another gentleman I just met is Stan Harley. He's a fellow pilot. He flew out of San Diego, Miramar, Top Gun, and he flew the F-4, F-14, and F-18, and I flew a little gunship. But anyway, that's all. This is a wonderful, wonderful brotherhood. So Harry and Stan are talking about what they see, and then again, it was Harry who educated me about this 90-year cycle. So let's go back to 1929, and today is 2020. We're in a 90-year cycle. And so they're both short-term and long-term. And the reason Stan and Harry are together today is Stan is more very, very micro, short-term. And so we're going to hear their points of view. This is especially important because what they're predicting is, I think, we're in the biggest bubble in history. Harry, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, Robert. I mean, I only have a few short-term newsletters that I track, and Stan is number one of two of those. because he's a cycle guy like me. He focuses more on the short term, but he was the first guy of all the newsletters I've gotten to also recognize this 90-year cycle, the biggest cycle of all times. If you look at the stock market, except 250 years back, there's only one cycle that stands out. Super bubble peaks every 90 years. And so Stan is a short-term guy normally, but he's also gets the long-term cycle. So we both agree. It is so rare that somebody like me, long-term with demographic cycles, and now this 90-year cycle would say this is not just a peak in the stock market. It's the greatest peak of your lifetime and the greatest crash and the sale of a lifetime on assets ahead. So
let's Stan. What do you want to say? The only reason we're pilots, we're open-minded. That's the biggest difference, right, Stan?
We are open-minded. We are. From a technical perspective, Robert, I look for divergences in a topping evolution. Bottoms in the stock market tend to be one and done, V events. Sometimes it's a retest. Tops, however, tend to be protracted affairs that span several months, sometimes years. But in the context of that 7-year cycle that I was talking about a little while ago, the tops tend to span several months. So early on in the topping phase, we see the largest number of stocks making new highs in indices. And then over a period of several months, we will see fewer and fewer stocks, fewer and fewer of the benchmark indices making new highs.
Okay, so once again, this is August 2020 because what we're talking about is short term now.
Yes. Okay. And over the last several months, we've seen the Dow Transports go to a new high. That was back in 2018. In January of this year, we saw the New York Composite go to a new high. In February, we saw the Dow and the S&P. And now the only major index making a new all-time high is the NASDAQ Composite. Yeah. And this is very, very typical of how tops are formed. You get a thinning in the advance as the topping structure evolves. It is possible the S&P may kiss a new high here in the next day or so. We're so close. I think when this thing is done, I think, and you hold the chart back in your face, it'll look like a double top in the S&P 500. But I think the Dow Transports has seen their high for the cycle. I think the New York Composite, which is the most important index of all, has seen its high. The Dow Industrials, and now we're down to the S&P and the NAS.
Wait, for those who don't speak technical language, a double top is like your 2 strikes.
Yes.
And then 3 strikes, you're out. So this is my question. I want to ask both of you. I don't know, and historically, I've never seen so much money printed in such a short time. And we're laughing about our friend Peter Schiff. You know, he has this different. We all have different points of view. And Peter is calling for inflation, and Harry's calling for deflation. What's the difference? You know, like Schiff's a great friend of ours, but we see it differently. We see the same scenario, the same event differently. So, Harry, why is Peter blind as a bat?
Oh, Robert, let me give you a figure that's very important. $473 trillion, 6 times the GDP of the world. That's how much financial assets there are, and it's more than double than it was at the peak of those financial assets in 2007, 2008, before the last bubble peak. What governments did around the world was when we had this great downturn, the next Great Depression, like 2008, 2009, like 1930, 31, they just printed money to erase it. That is the worst thing I've ever seen in history. I am going to go down, Robert, saying these central bankers are the stupidest people in all of history and will go down as that only in retrospect because they think you can make things go away by printing money. So,
good. So
Peter Schiff says, oh, this has got to cause inflation. No, they are fighting. They are offsetting deflation of financial assets. 477 trillion, 6 times GDP. They're fighting that. This is the deflationary era.
So this is 1929 again.
We're going to get inflation here. No way.
So this is 19. So inflation will mean food prices go up, car prices go up, and all that. What you're saying is we're going into
that's nothing, Robert.
I understand. I understand. I
Financial
understand.
assets is so much bigger than consumer inflation.
I understand. I
Look at the wrong move.
understand, but that's where most of the minds are at. Well, eggs cost me more money.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a major depression. Stan, quick, what do you think on that?
I agree with Harry. I think we are making a 1929 style top, an 1835 top, 1720. All of those, the three that preceded this one, I think this is on the scale of that one.
Okay, so this is my question then, please, to both of you. How does printing so much money, because I don't think they printed this much money or they might have, but I don't know if they've ever printed so much money. So how does that affect the crash?
They are printing so much money to offset the decline in financial assets. Just this recent crash in stocks in February to March took out $25 trillion globally in just stocks, not counting real estate and other financial assets. The governments are having to print more and more money to offset this bubble crash in financial assets, which they have created. This is totally artificial. This whole boom since 2009 has seen the lowest growth in GDP in any recovery ever, and the greatest increase in stocks and financial assets ever. Something's wrong here. It's called printing money to offset a downturn.
Okay, Stan, what do you want to say?
I think we are very close to rolling over here and heading south. But to Harry's point, the government has borrowed a lot of money, pumped it into the economy, and I believe this is an artificial economy right now. It's not consumer-driven. It's being driven with borrowed government money.
So, Harry, is that why you're calling gold to drop below 1,000 or something?
Okay, Robert.
Peter Schiff wants to kill you right now.
Gold has held up better than any other commodity, which is its index, the CRB, in history in this downturn, because gold has a crisis value. But gold is an inflation hedge, and we're talking, that's the difference between me and Peter Schiff. Deflation is the end result instead of inflation. I see gold going back to the low in late 2015 of 1,050, maybe a little lower, and it still would be the best commodity of all to hold up. And then I see a huge rally long term for one reason. The biggest growth in the future, demographics, which is my expertise, is Asia. Asians love gold. Chinese, Indians buy more gold than anybody in the world. Gold will lead the next commodity rally, but gold is an inflation hedge, not a deflation hedge, and it will go down. I do actually think now, Robert, that gold has broken 2,000. It's past that. It'll go maybe to 2,200. But gold is going to go down. Gold is not your safe haven. The crash in February, March showed you gold went up at first and then went down. Right. And then the bigger crash in 2008, gold went running for mommy when deflation set in. Gold is not your safe haven here. Now, once it goes down to 1,000, I would load up the trucks.
Stan, comments. I mean, even if you're not, I don't know if you're in the gold market at all, but this is a war between Harry and Peter Schiff.
I have a positive outlook on the metals complex. I think gold is going to go substantially higher, and it's pulling young.
But this is my real question, okay, both of you. Will the Fed do the same thing in the next crash? Will they just print more, or are they going to actually find religion and say we better cut this out?
Robert, I don't know whether the borrowed money mentality will continue, particularly after the election. I think the current administration, and indeed the other side of the aisle, wants to pump borrowed money into this economy. And it's going to work until interest rates rise. And my work says interest rates are going to remain low for about another 2 years. Once they turn the corner, then that's going to make the situation extremely problematic. That is to say, we're going to have this huge debt we're going to have to service. And when interest rates start spiking, when they go from 1.5 to 3 to 4 to 5, the U.S. government is going to have a hard time servicing the debt, which means we'll have to slash spending. When the government slashes spending, that means fewer jobs, and it snowballs.
Yes, so we had to cut it out because of time, but I hope you got the gist of it. Definitely, it's interesting to see that usually you have some economists and so forth, business people, they usually don't be on the same page all the time. There's still some differences of opinion some here and there, but for the majority, I'm seeing those two gentlemen are almost on the same wavelength, the same conclusion. What is interesting though, the first time I really got in depth analysis, I got it from a gentleman called Ray Dalio, who talks about the short-term debt cycle and the long-term debt cycle. And it's amazing to see that these gentlemen are actually also mentioning that without probably hearing what Ray Dalio had to say about that. So that's very interesting to see that coming together. And you can see that they're very, very spot on. And so in closing, before I close though, there's something that's in Ecclesiastes 3:14 to 16 that says, um, no, I can't find it right now. For some reason, I think I pulled the wrong thing. Nonetheless, the before I close off though, the NRPB loan program, you should definitely check out. The honest issue I have with it is that it they alluded to the fact that you have to be creative and so forth. So don't do similar things that's already in the economy. The problem is, though, for us to do that to a great extent, you have to have access to payment mechanisms that maybe, let's say you want to offer a service to persons globally, they have to be able to pay you. And you know, PayPal is a big issue for many of of the local entrepreneurs. And one of the things that the central bank is saying is that um, basically they are the ones has to together with government come up with a law and so forth, but the central bank is alluding to the fact that because PayPal is a company, they would have to set up a branch here and so forth in order for us to be able to get to be able to receive PayPal money. And I just don't see why would PayPal want to do that. Why would PayPal want to spend money to establish a company here just to maybe receive a small portion, maybe not even at 1% of what they're making now, just to benefit us? So it makes no sense to me. So it looks like you will have to then try to go around the system. And then the problem with doing that is then why would you then report the money you're making if the money has if you have to go set up a company and set up a system in the States to receive money via PayPal, and then so it doesn't make any sense to me. But nonetheless, sometimes we make things more difficult than what it is, but yeah, it is what it is. So nonetheless, I want to thank you for listening. I'll see you again next week in another informative program. Bye bye for now.